Okay, so we're diving into some CIA stuff today.
Right.
A really, really cool collection of documents that you sent over.
Yeah.
All centered around people who are connected to the CIA in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission here is to be your guide as we go through these.
Absolutely.
And pull out, I think, some really compelling insights about what this world was like.
Yeah, and you've given us a great set of documents to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to start by looking at some of the people who appear in them.
Okay.
And for each one, we can sort of think about why was the CIA interested in them?
Right.
What kind of information did they collect? And what does this tell us about the broader world of intelligence at the time?
Okay, so let's jump right in.
Yeah.
With a memo that's dated October 24, 1960.
Okay.
Concerning Mr. David S. Robles.
Okay.
And it looks like the Office of Security was tasked with verifying 2 of his residence addresses.
Okay.
Now, these addresses were described as backstopped.
Oh, interesting.
One in the D.C. area and one in Los Angeles.
So 2 backstopped addresses.
Yeah. So what does that, when you see backstopped addresses, what does that kind of signal to you?
I mean, right away, if you backstopped addresses just signal that there's a cover story being created.
Okay.
A way to provide plausible deniability.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that there were 2 of them in different locations, suggests that maybe he needed cover for different kinds of work.
Okay.
Or maybe they were trying to make it even harder to track him down.
Right.
I mean, this was pretty common in intelligence work.
Okay, so it wasn't just the addresses.
Yeah.
There was a follow-up inquiry that specifically wanted to know his D.C. address as of October 5th, 1960.
Oh, specific date.
A very specific date, yeah.
Interesting.
And the memo also said that he was a recent State Department employee who had resigned from a position overseas.
Okay.
So why do you think they were so interested in his movements after he left the State Department?
Well, no, maybe it was a routine security review after he resigned.
Right.
Maybe they were looking back at what he was doing overseas.
Hmm?
Or maybe they thought, oh, this guy's got experience and now he's not with the State Department anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe we can use him for something.
Right.
So confirming his address would be like the first step.
To get in touch.
Yeah. You got to know where to find him.
Exactly.
If you want to contact him or keep tabs on him.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The memo mentions that his family hadn't actually joined him in D.C.
Oh, okay.
And they thought they were with his wife's family somewhere in New England.
Hmm.
His employer is listed as the U.S. Army Group with a specific emergency contact number.
Okay.
And then it says that backstopping him was necessary because he was involved in, quote, some private business ventures in Phoenix, Arizona.
So it seems like a carefully constructed identity almost.
Right, yeah. It feels very layered.
Yeah, and that's kind of a core principle of Cold War intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Creating layers of plausible deniability.
Right.
Especially for people who might be doing sensitive work.
Yeah.
Or things that they couldn't be officially connected to.
Okay.
So the fact that his official employer and these supposed business ventures are different,
Yeah.
that screams cover identity, right? And the detail about his family being somewhere else, well, maybe that was to explain why he was alone in D.C.
Right.
Or maybe it was just another way to contact him if they needed to.
Oh, interesting.
And the U.S. Army group thing,
Yeah.
that could have been part of the cover, too.
Yucca.
Giving him a reason to be around.
Like, he's got military backing.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's really doing something else.
Right, exactly.
And then it gets even better.
Okay.
Because for any inquiries in L.A.,
Yeah.
Robles was supposed to be described as a single individual,
Oh, wow.
around 35,
Okay.
6 feet tall, 200 pounds,
Okay.
swarthy complexion, dark hair and eyes,
Okay.
with a good job making over $10,000 a year.
So a totally different persona.
Totally different.
Wow.
Why have such a distinct cover in L.A.,
Right.
you know?
Well, that seems to say that he was probably doing different things in these 2 places.
Okay.
I mean, the single guy persona in L.A.
Yeah.
would keep him separate from anything they knew about him in D.C.
Right.
or his family.
Right.
And that detailed description,
Yeah.
that would help if anyone was trying to find him under that alias.
Okay.
So it's like he was leading a double life professionally, at least as far as the CIA was concerned.
Okay, so let's move on a few years.
Yeah.
We have a couple of files from November and September 1964
Okay.
that detail the arrival of several individuals in the U.S.,
Okay.
and this looks like a much bigger operation.
Yeah, what jumps out at you first?
Well, there's an incredible amount of detail in these files.
Yeah, there is.
It outlines their return around the end of November, beginning of December 1964,
Okay.
with very specific dates, times,
Wow.
and even the type of aircraft they're using.
Huh?
So first, an agency C-118,
Okay.
then a U.S. Air Force C-118,
Okay.
landing at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland.
So this is like a major operation then?
It feels like a major operation.
Yeah.
And the list of people is interesting, too.
Yeah.
We have Bob Gambino, Arthur Garza, William Robertson,
Okay.
and a Dr. James Fearon, MD,
Okay.
accompanying the individuals.
So a whole team.
A whole team, and then there's this very detailed list of what they call loose cargo.
Loose cargo, what's in there?
Outboard motors, radio beacons, silence weapons, other weapons,
Wow.
commo gear medical equipment, and parachute drop equipment.
So that definitely sounds like some kind of covert operation.
Right.
Maybe paramilitary stuff or support for that kind of thing.
Right.
I mean, medical equipment and parachute gear,
Yeah.
that makes me think of a team that's going into a dangerous place.
Right.
And then there's a note that Gambino might be carrying TSD material.
Yeah.
That's Technical Services Division.
Right.
So that means we're talking highly specialized equipment.
Oh,
The kind of stuff you'd use for really secret missions.
Okay, so then there's mention of an Air Force cover story with the subjects transferring to a C-54
Okay.
for further travel to Camp Pickett in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And D. James Fitchett was supposed to meet Customs and Immigration.
Mm.
It sounds very carefully managed.
Yeah, they clearly wanted to keep this whole thing under wraps.
Yeah.
I mean, the Air Force cover would make it look official
Right.
and maybe hide what was really going on.
Right.
And Camp Pickett,
Yeah.
that's a military training facility.
Right, yeah.
So maybe these guys were involved in training or debriefing
Okay.
or getting ready for another mission.
Okay.
And Fitchett meeting Customs and Immigration.
Yeah.
Well, that's about smoothing things over.
Right.
Making sure there are no questions when they arrive.
Okay.
So they can just slip right in.
And it says that Deputy Commissioner of Customs Lawrence Fleischman and Frank Braden from Immigration and Naturalization Service were both informed.
Okay.
So there was some interagency awareness.
Yeah, so you're seeing how the agency could pull off these complex operations, moving people and sensitive stuff across borders
Yeah.
with cover stories and coordination with other government agencies.
It's impressive.
It was essential for them to be effective and stay hidden.
Okay, so then there's a similar file
Meh.
from September 1964
Okay.
that lists the same individuals
Well, the same people.
and says they were flying to Camp Pickett that morning.
So not a one-time thing. Right.
Interesting. With Braden issuing immigration forms.
Mm.
So this wasn't an isolated incident.
What do you think that means?
It feels like it implies some kind of recurring operation
Right.
or a dedicated team doing ongoing activities.
Yeah.
And the mention of immigration forms makes me think these individuals might not have been U.S. citizens.
Yeah, you'd need those for entry and exit.
Right.
And it says re-entry permits were valid for 12 months.
Yeah.
So that supports the idea of extended deployments or regular travel.
For this operation.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit now
Okay.
and look at Edward P. Morgan,
Edward P. Moore.
who is the subject of a memo from May 1967.
Okay.
And this one seems to focus on his background and potential financial interests.
Okay. What stands out to you?
Well, the author of the memo knew Morgan
Uh-huh.
from the Society of Former Agents of the FBI,
Oh, interesting.
starting in the early 1950s.
Okay.
So he had a background in federal law enforcement.
Yeah, that would definitely catch the CIA's attention.
Right, and they were both interested in having the ex-agents national convention in D.C.
Oh, okay. So that's how they knew each other.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then it says the author hadn't actually seen Morgan much since 1957.
Okay.
Their last encounter was in January 1967
Yeah.
at an ex-agent's dinner.
Okay.
And it really emphasizes that their association was only through this group,
Mm-hmm.
no personal contact.
Why do you think they make that distinction?
I think it's to make it clear that what follows is based on professional association
Okay.
and maybe hearsay.
So not necessarily firsthand knowledge.
Right. And then it goes on to say that Morgan was a tall, personable guy
Mm-hmm.
who did really well in the FBI training division
Okay.
and even caught J. Edgar Hoover's attention with his speaking abilities.
Mm-hmm.
And after his time at the Bureau, he went into federal communications practice.
Okay.
And his firm, Welch, Mott, and Morgan, became very well known.
So from law enforcement to communications law.
Exactly.
Interesting career path.
Right.
What do you make of that?
Well, his success in the FBI and the fact that Hoover noticed him, I mean, that tells you he was probably a pretty influential guy.
Right.
And moving into federal communications, especially at a time when media was growing so rapidly. I mean, that would have put him in a position to know a lot of sensitive information.
Yeah, and have powerful connections.
Right.
For sure.
Okay, but here's the really interesting part.
Okay.
The rumor was that his firm secured TV franchises for a bunch of oil men in the Middle East and got paid in oil leases.
Oil leases.
Which were supposedly worth at least $1 million.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
So why would the agency be interested in the financial dealings of a former FBI agent?
Well, think about the bigger picture.
Okay.
The Middle East and oil were hugely important strategically.
Right.
So if someone had a lot of money tied up in media franchises over there, that could be a way for foreign powers to exert influence. So the agency might have wanted to know where those franchises came from, who Morgan was dealing with, and if there were any national security risks.
Okay.
I mean, $1 million is a lot of money.
Yeah.
It definitely raises questions about what was going on.
Right.
Maybe there was some shady stuff happening behind the scenes.
Okay, so now we've got a secret eyes-only memo from June 7, 1966, about Robert A. Maheu.
Robert A. Maheu.
Who's described as a personnel relations executive and former FBI agent who had been used by the Office of Security for many sensitive assignments since the early 50s.
So this is someone who's deeply connected to the agency.
It seems that way.
Yeah. I mean, eyes only right away tells you this is serious stuff and all those sensitive assignments.
Yeah.
And the fact that he was cleared by the DDP multiple times, that means they really trusted him and relied on him. For a long time.
Yeah.
And his business, Robert A. Maheu, associates with offices in D.C. and L.A. That was probably a front for his real work.
A legitimate front.
Yeah, exactly.
And the memo mentions that the Senate Subcommittee investigating wiretapping.
Oh, the Long Committee?
Yeah, the Long Committee had shown a lot of interest in Maheu, but he had never actually done any wiretapping for them.
Okay, so his name was coming up, but not for that specific reason.
Right. So what does that suggest to you?
Well, it means that Maheu was doing things that were controversial enough to attract the attention of a committee investigating wiretapping, even though he wasn't actually wiretapping for them.
Okay.
So the OGC, the Office of General Counsel, they'd want to know what he was up to to make sure the agency wasn't at risk.
Okay, and then the memo tells this story about a casual mention from Walter Yeagley at the Justice Department to Lawrence Houston, who was the agency's general counsel. Yeagley mentioned that Maheu had been informed by an aide employee, Raymond A. Taggart, that he might be called to testify before the Long Committee.
Interesting.
About his work for Maheu in 1954 to 1955. And apparently that period was all about the rivalry between the Greek shipping magnates Stavros Niarchos and Aristotle Onassis.
Oh, wow. So this is getting juicy.
It is. So what's the connection here?
So you've got these two guys, Niarchos and Onassis.
Yeah.
They were fighting for control of oil shipments out of Saudi Arabia. And this was a big deal globally. Onassis had made a deal with King Saud, which would basically give him control over a huge chunk of the oil exports. And the British, the Germans, and the Americans were all pretty worried about this.
Understandably.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't want one person having that much power over oil. And Maheu was working for Niarchos in this whole mess as a kind of fixer.
Wow. So then there's this guy, Spiridon Katapodis, a Greek broker who thought Onassis had cheated him. And he launched this public campaign against Onassis's business practices. Which led to a bunch of lawsuits, including one in New York called Katapodis v. Onassis. And during a pre-trial examination, Niarchos said he couldn't answer certain questions because of government privilege.
Government privilege. That's interesting.
And eventually the CIA was named in court documents as the government agency of interest.
So the CIA's involvement in this whole private business dispute became public knowledge.
It did.
Wow, that's pretty big.
Yeah, the memo says that the CIA was working closely with the Justice Department and the State Department. And that Mr. Houston himself was watching the hearings.
So they were definitely paying attention.
Yes.
They had a lot at stake here.
And the memo reveals that Maheu had a covert security clearance issued in 1954 for use on Project 2EIXT.
Project 2EIXT.
And this was requested by the Near East 2 Division,
okay,
which confirms his ties to the agency during this period.
Yeah, he was in deep.
Yeah. And when they contacted Maheu about the Long Committee's interests, he immediately thought it was about the Onassis operation.
Okay.
And he said that he had Onassis's New York office covered at some point.
Covered in quotes.
Yes.
That sounds like surveillance to me.
Right.
I mean, he knew right away that it was about Onassis.
Yeah.
And that he'd been keeping tabs on him.
Yeah. And then there's this lawyer, Fensterwald, who said that Maheu was the kind of guy who cut the government in just enough on his touchy operations to be able to hide behind them if he needed to.
So he was using his connections to protect himself.
Right.
That's a pretty cynical view.
Yeah, but maybe not entirely wrong.
True. I mean, in the intelligence world, sometimes people use their connections for their own benefit.
Okay, and the lawyer also said that the senator investigating Maheu would probably keep going unless someone convinced him otherwise.
So they thought Maheu was up to no good.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
So then we learned that Maheu's main client at the time was Howard Hughes.
Howard Hughes, wow.
And he'd done a lot of work for Dave McDonald of the United Steelworkers.
Okay.
And while the agency said they weren't interested in those clients specifically, there's a note that the I.O. division...
That's international organizations?
Yes.
Right.
Had a covert security approval to approach Maheu about their interest in international labor.
So Maheu had his fingers in a lot of pies.
He did. He did. And the memo concludes that they didn't think Maheu wanted the agency to front for him in the Onassis tap matter.
Okay.
Because it wasn't actually agency-sponsored.
Right.
But they were worried that pursuing it would reveal their role in the whole Niarchus-Onassis feud.
Dude, that was already public. It's from the court case?
Exactly. And they said even if they could classify the details, it would create a field day for the press.
A field day.
And critics of the agency.
Yeah, they didn't want that kind of attention.
They did not. And we also get a glimpse into Maheu's other activities.
Oh, cool.
Like providing cover for a DODS staff agent in his D.C. office and his involvement in operations against Sukarno in 1958 and 1959.
Sukarno, wow.
Which Alan Dulles knew about.
So this guy was busy.
He was constantly being used.
Yeah, and the fact that Alan Dulles knew about it shows how high level this stuff was.
Right, and the memo says that because he was used so much, he was vulnerable to exploitation if he was ever interrogated.
Oh, yeah. If someone really dug into his past, they could find a lot of damaging information.
Okay, so let's look at something a little more administrative now. A memo from February 1965 about key personnel assignments for the Office of Security. And it says that Mr. Arthur C. Sheridan was going to replace Mr. James P. O'Connell, Jr. in Okinawa.
Okinawa, okay.
And Mr. James W. McCord, Jr. was going to take over Sheridan's role as Chief Technical Division.
Okay, so just some internal shuffling.
Right, but what do you think this tells us about the agency's priorities?
Well, even though these are just personnel moves, they give you some insight into how the agency was organized and what they thought was important. Sending Sheridan to Okinawa shows that they were focused on that region.
Okay.
And McCord becoming chief of the technical division.
Right.
Well, that's interesting because of what happened later.
Yeah.
It seems like they knew that the technical side of security was crucial.
Right, which leads us to a recommendation
for
an honor or merit award in 1966.
An award.
For James W. McCord, Jr., William M. Marcy, and Alan F. Pettit. They were being recognized for developing something called a unique audio countermeasures item in fluoroscopic scanning.
Wow, that sounds like some serious spy tech.
Right.
What was this award all about?
Well, it was a major breakthrough for detecting hidden microphones and other devices.
So they came up with a new way to find bugs.
Exactly, which was a constant threat during the Cold War.
Oh, yeah. Everyone was trying to eavesdrop on everyone else.
Right.
So being able to find those bugs was essential.
And the memo describes the equipment as inconspicuous and easy to transport. In 2 attaché cases.
So they could be discreet about it.
Right. It would have allowed audio countermeasures teams to work much more quietly.
Right.
And it says that this invention had the potential for future clandestine use worldwide. And would greatly enhance the security of all agency installations.
So this was a big deal for them.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. I mean, in the Cold War, technology was always evolving, both for offense and defense.
Right.
So being able to counter eavesdropping was a huge advantage.
Okay.
And this award shows how much the agency valued technical expertise for keeping themselves safe and for carrying out their secret missions.
And of course, James W. McCord Jr. later became infamous for his role in the Watergate scandal.
Oh, wow. Talk about irony.
It is ironic.
Yeah, here he is getting an award for security. And then he's involved in one of the biggest security breaches in American history.
Okay, so now we've got a personal history statement.
Okay.
From August 1961 for Emilio America Rodriguez.
Emilio America Rodriguez.
And it's full of information about his life.
Okay, what kind of information are we talking about?
Well, he was born in Cuba.
Okay.
But he became a U.S. citizen.
Interesting.
He lived in Florida. He was a contract agent.
Okay.
And it even lists his salary.
So this is all about vetting him.
Right.
Figuring out if he's suitable for agency work.
Yeah. And it says he got his citizenship through marriage and naturalization.
Oh, okay.
And that his previous nationality was Cuban.
So they'd want to know about any potential loyalties or vulnerabilities.
Right.
Because of his background.
Right. And he was willing to travel.
Okay.
Especially in Latin America.
Oh, Latin America. That's interesting.
And he was fluent in Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Italian.
Wow, multilingual.
Yes, and he knew scientific and engineering terminology in Spanish.
So he's got skills that would be valuable to the agency?
Right, especially with their focus on Latin America at the time.
Yeah.
His language skills and his willingness to travel make him a really versatile asset.
For sure.
He could gather intelligence, he could work as a liaison.
Right.
Maybe even do propaganda work.
Yeah, he's got a lot of options.
And his technical Spanish suggests he could be involved in scientific or industrial intelligence.
Makes sense.
Okay, so his employment history is pretty diverse.
Okay.
He was assistant district manager for Century Electric Company, in charge of their Havana office until June 1961. Okay. Which he held at the same time as being a principal agent for the CIA.
Oh, wow. So that's definitely a cover.
Right. He was using his business role to hide his real work for the agency.
Classic move.
Right. And he'd also been a teacher, an administrator.
Okay.
He had experience in foreign trade management and even some medical research.
Wow, this guy's done a lot.
He had, and he was a licensed pilot.
A pilot, too.
So what do you think all these skills and experiences suggest about how the agency might have used him?
Well, that combination of a normal-sounding job in business and his CIA work in the same place.
Yeah.
That's a textbook example of using a company as cover.
Right.
For intelligence operations.
And with all his skills, they could use him in so many different ways.
They could play to his strengths depending on the mission.
Right.
Whether it was his business smarts or his languages or even his flying.
Okay, so let's move on to Harold Francis Swenson.
Okay.
We have a secret memo from June 1962 about a cover story for him.
A cover story.
For sensitive operational activity.
Okay.
Primarily in Latin America.
Okay.
And they were going to give him credentials as a U.S. government employee. Attached to the U.S. Army Attaché section in Paris, France.
Paris. For someone working in Latin America.
Yeah. This is a little strange, right?
Yeah, why do you think they do that?
Well, I think it's to create distance.
Okay.
And plausible deniability.
So if he's based in Paris, it's less obvious that his work in Latin America is connected to the U.S. government.
Exactly.
It makes him look less suspicious.
Right.
And having his credentials controlled by the chief of station in Paris, that keeps things secure and organized.
Yeah.
They can manage his cover from there.
Okay, and he was also given an alias.
An alias, what was it?
Harold Francis Safley.
Harold Francis Safley.
With a bunch of fake documents.
Including a driver's license.
Yes. And there's a handwritten note.
Ooh, a note? What's it say?
It mentions someone named Geo Ladner.
Okay.
Who asked for alias CIA credentials for Swenson.
Okay.
And describes him as a smooth guy who handles himself. Okay.
So it's like a personal recommendation?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, all the fake documents. That's standard procedure for undercover work.
Okay.
But that little note, it shows that there's a human element to all this.
Right.
Someone vouching for Swenson.
Okay, so then we have two very brief secret notifications.
Okay.
From April and September 1965 about a military cover backstop.
Military cover backstop.
For a name that's been redacted. Right. And it says it's for a continuing effect.
Continuing effect. So what do you make of these?
Well, it seems like they were setting up and maintaining a military cover.
Right.
For someone whose name we don't know.
Right.
And continuing effect means it was a long-term thing.
Yeah.
And they mentioned Form 1323.
Yeah.
Which is used for transferring cover responsibility.
Okay.
So that's probably just standard procedure for managing these cover identities.
Okay, now let's talk about the Lee Harvey Oswald case.
Lee Harvey Oswald.
Wow. Yeah, there are two memos from January 1964 about Samuel Wise.
Samuel Wise.
And according to a newspaper column
Wise was one of two people mainly responsible for letting Oswald come back to the U.S.
Back to the U.S. from where?